Okay, so before I get on to the main point of this video, just an update on the disaster in Colombia. One of the main things that's being reported is that a young, we would say in the UK, football soccer team was involved, the Chapecoense team. The flight was carrying 81 people. It was travelling from Sao Paulo to Medellin and crashed near Medellin, Colombia. It's said to be bad weather there in recent days. 81 people on board. There was said to be very few survivors. There was a young soccer team, but there was also apparently 21 Brazilian journalists. So this now ranks as Brazil's worst sports disaster, as well as Brazil's worst disaster for journalists in a single incident. So sad news indeed. Anyway, I want to talk about consistency, specifically on my channel. I can remember a few events that have divided the world so much along the left-right pendulum as the death of Fidel Castro. I have tried to lay out my position. I've made a few videos about this subject now. I basically take the view that none of Castro's achievements can excuse his tyranny. And I just read something interesting, a quotation from a publication, I forget what it was, but someone made the point that those who are pointing out the world-class healthcare and free education, all this sort of thing, are seemingly insinuating that you cannot get a welfare state without repressing people. Now, I'm not actually a conservative on these things. I do believe in universal healthcare as a principle. I believe, I don't know about free education, but I'm not against those principles. But with Fidel Castro, nothing excuses the fact he was a communist dictator. And people are saying things like, oh, the Americans left him with no choice, as if he's a petulant child who had to be that way because he didn't get his own way. As for liberating his people, well, he ended up as a puppet of the Soviet Union. This was a man who in 1961 urged Nikita Khrushchev to attack the United States. Thankfully, JFK and Khrushchev had more stability than Fidel Castro, which is why nuclear war was avoided. And people are praising this guy like some sort of... Also, what's going to be revealed in Cuba in the coming years, I believe, is, in fact, they're already coming out, is that this great comrade, this great socialist comrade, actually had a private life of luxury when his people were living in poverty. And it reminds me of the delusion that certain African dictators put on. Mugabe's another example. I have no doubt that when Mugabe dies, there will be similar tributes, probably not quite on the same scale because he's not quite as famous, but there'll be people coming out and saying, oh, he stood up to the British Empire and he was a great man, all the rest of it. And they'll totally excuse the absolute repression of all political opposition. Ask Morgan Tsvangirai. So, yeah, this is really polarised opinion. Debates are still going on. There will no doubt be more debates when the funeral takes place. Actually, he's already been cremated. It's more like a memorial service. So yeah, it's really polarised people between left and right. When I've been in debates with this, people have accused me of being a conservative on the issues. That really is nonsense. You don't have to be politically conservative to recognise a dictatorship. And to my conservative viewers, I appreciate that sometimes it can look like lefties are always excusing tyranny, because many do, quite frankly. As a centrist, for me, the most important thing is to be consistent. I think the worst thing you can be accused of in politics is probably double standards. And I'm someone who's very politically interested. I'm interested in what happens in the world. I'm interested in what happens in my country. And one thing I'm always acutely aware of is not myself falling into the trap of double standards. So I stand by everything I've said about Castro. But if, for the sake of argument, a right-wing dictator who happened to be pro-American and anti-communist was to die, there's not many left nowadays, I would be just as vocal if that dictator had a very dubious human rights record. Indeed, I remember when Augusto Pinochet died, Margaret Thatcher shamefully lauded him. Now, I take the position that if I criticise Jeremy Corbyn for that, and I did, and I do, at the time, I wasn't that politically interested back then, but I would have criticised Thatcher as well for praising a man who had dissidents drugged and thrown out of helicopters. You know, Pinochet was a tyrant. So I think we have to be very careful that when we criticise a position of someone or we criticise a certain ideology, we are consistent in whatever it is we are criticising. Human rights is, of course, a very prominent issue. The fact of the matter is both left-wing regimes and right-wing regimes have been guilty of heinous human rights abuses. Moderates on both sides shouldn't sort of underplay that. So moderate conservatives shouldn't downplay the excesses of right-wing dictators. And left-wing people shouldn't downplay the excesses of left-wing dictators. One of the challenges of being a centrist is, firstly, people figure on the fence that you don't have hard conviction. Not true at all. But another challenge is that it would probably be more easy to get into a comfortable little camp of hard left or hard right, populist left or populist right, and kind of nail your colours to the mast and say, I will always condemn this, but I'm going to turn a blind eye to that. I think if you really, really, really genuinely believe in something, you have to be consistent. So, for instance, if you believe in human rights, you can't criticise one regime and then turn a blind eye to another. And to be fair, those who say that Western governments are hypocritical in this might have a point. After all, Western governments, the British government, helped get Saudi Arabia onto the UN human rights body. I mean, I am embarrassed by that, and that's something I will not condone or excuse. And then, of course, there's all the explanations about trade and all this, but in the end of the day, we have to at least have some semblance of consistency. And this is what I personally try to do on any issue. On any issue. Just as when I criticise feminism, I don't downplay issues that impact women. When I criticise Islamism, I never generalise all Muslims. Consistency is very, very, very important. And it isn't always easy, because in the world of politics and in online discourse especially, people lose their tempers. You know, people feel that they need to prove something. They feel that they need to say you're wrong because of this. Now, I think consistency is just such an important thing. And I also understand realpolitik. I understand that in the world, big countries cannot just shun every unpleasant regime, but at the very least they shouldn't praise or pander to them. So, for instance, if it is absolutely necessary that we must trade with Saudi Arabia, we should use that alliance to put much more pressure on them than we currently do. It just seems inconsistent that the British government would, on one hand, say, oh, we do question them about the human rights thing, but we're going to help them get onto the UN human rights body? That seems absurd to me. And it isn't easy. It's not easy to get a balance, but it is necessary. Some people excuse Castro and say he was a freedom fighter. They are practicing hypocrisy because Castro did not get freedom dissidents. I've heard some people saying that those who celebrate in Miami are all the sons and daughters of gangsters who fled Cuba. I'm sorry, but 1.5 million people you cannot just dismiss that way. That may have been the case in the early days. There may have been some Batista subordinates fled. But in the 80s and 90s, they were just normal Cubans who wanted a better life. It's nonsense. So basically, people need to be consistent. And I've always acutely aware of not practicing double standards myself. And if anyone accuses me of double standards, that's an allegation I take very seriously, and I'll look at it and I'll say, well, have I been guilty of that? And if I haven't, I will robustly defend myself, because I do believe it's one of the worst things you can be accused of in political discourse. And it happens all the time. So all I would say to people out there, it doesn't matter really if you're conservative or liberal, left-wing or right-wing. If you believe in human rights, then for goodness sake, be consistent, whether it be Castro or a right-wing dictator. If you believe in freedom of expression, be consistent. I believe in freedom of expression for all. The only limit to freedom of expression, in my view, should be when there is an explicit threat of violence or advocacy of a terrorist attack. So consistency is so important. Let me know your thoughts. And that's it really. I will be making more videos, of course, about my centrist outlook on this world. I think it's very topical right now. Thanks for watching.